What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. It's time for another light novel discussion video, and today I'll be going over the first few volumes of She Professed Herself, Pupil of the Wise Man. This is an isekai series that I got into reading after having seen the anime finally. And while I do have a lot of thoughts about the anime adaptation, I'll be doing my best to keep this focused on the light novels as much as possible. There will be a lot said about the anime, but I'll try to keep it, relevant. Before I get too deep into this ocean of isekai goodness, though, do me a favor and head down to the comments and let me know what sorts of light novels you enjoy reading. And while you're down there, be sure to smash that like button so that the YouTube algorithm gets infected with the power of the Gruz. So, She Professed Herself, Pupil of the Wise Man is a light novel series from Ryusen Hirotsugu that started as a web novel back in April of 2012 and is also a manga and an anime. The series is about VR MMO game player Sakamori Kagami, who ends up in his game world. And if you're thinking that this sounds a lot like another anime you've probably seen or heard of, that's because it kind of pretty common for this to happen these days. Lots of guys are getting isekai'd into their game world. Much like being plowed into another world by Truck-kun, if you're a loner Japanese guy and you play VR MMOs, just be warned, you may be next. However, Pupil of the Wise Man was written back in 2012, and that makes it pretty old by web novel standards, with only Sword Art Online beating pretty much everything because it came out in 2002. The VR MMO game that Kagami plays is called Arc Earth Online and is a unique game experience since the players have an unprecedented amount of freedom and creative ability in the game world, going so far as to set up their own countries and kingdoms, and from this some of the early players rose to great prominence and are called the 9 Wise Men, of which Kagami's character, wow, this is a very on the nose character name, Danbulf Gandagor, right? Not to be confused with Gandalf Dumbledore. Wow. Yes, Danbulf is one of the wise men. He is the wise man of the Tower of Summoning and has a floating island that he can use to travel with, warehouses filled with treasure. They put in the work and they have the rewards, and life for Kagami is good, especially when you play an elderly magician who has spent years refining your skills and honing your abilities. And like all video game players that take great pride in the aesthetic of their game character, Kagami decides to toy around with an in-game cash item he ended up with called the Vanity Case. If you play these games, you know that changing your character's appearance can cost money, and that's exactly what this is. So for laughs, Kagami decides to see what his ideal female character would look like in the game and spends all night working on, you guessed it, Girl Danbulf, for research purposes, of course. And blamski! The merge happens. Kagami wakes up in the world of Arc Earth Online and quickly learns that it's real. The NPCs are real people that now think for themselves, and there's been this 30-year time skip. And in that time, all of the wise men are missing, except for, I think, like maybe one other. As if this wasn't enough, you guessed it, Danbulf is no longer the respectable, famous old coot, but the cute, adorable girl that Kagami was last customizing. And since the whole effing planet knows who Danbulf was and his particular specialty in magic, it's decided that Danbulf will have to pass himself off as Mira, the pupil of the wise man. I never thought I would get that synopsis out. The first volume of the light novel does a really good job of fleshing out this game world and giving us, the reader, a sound education in how things work without it feeling like information dumping. Though, I gotta say, at some points, though, it does seem to be a bit much. There's a lot to this world. We get to see the way that Kagami explores the new world, both as a living participant and, of course, as a girl. In the past, Danbulf was only able to experience some things in virtual reality, but with reality, even things like eating, drinking, and Going to the bathroom are now integral to everyday living. And some of this awkwardness is played up for laughs as Mira struggles frequently with going to the toilet or wearing specific girls' clothing. After years spent in the perfect set of magical old man robes, Mira does not enjoy being dressed in anything else. I mean, who can blame her? You know, you got the perfect set of exotic magic robes. Why would you want to wear anything else? However, a gag that I feel gets overused in the light novel is the maids in the palace that constantly drag her off to strip her down and dress her up as though she were their plaything. So the plot. That's right. We haven't even gotten to the plot yet. Mira arrives in the kingdom of Archite and finds that her friend and fellow game player, the king of Archite, Solomon, yes, King Solomon, has been there since the game got made, or made real, I should say. He's been patiently struggling to keep the kingdom together and always on the lookout for members of his friends list to appear. Luminaria, the wise man, or should I say rather wise woman of the Tower of Elementary Magic, appeared before Danbulf did, and is also played by a male gamer that got stuck in female form for the past few decades. Together with Solomon, they've done their best to keep things going, but everyone agrees they need the rest of the wise men. So when Danbulf, the legendary goat of summoning magic, appears, Solomon quickly puts her to task finding the rest of the wise men. And for the first few volumes at least, well, this is where I'm at. I would say that the series is something of a slow burn that builds upon itself and establishes lots of lore through Mira's eyes. Since the disappearance of the wise men, different types of magic have risen to prominence, and summoning has sort of fallen out of style, much to Mira's horror. When Danbulf was still a thing, it was a highly respected magic class. Now it's treated like dirt, or worse, the stuff of legend, where it is kept. There isn't much in the way of an antagonist in the early volumes, but there is conflict, as hordes of monsters appear outside of their usual roaming areas. In fact, it becomes something of a point that these monsters are behaving differently, and it's a mystery that they can't solve yet. Though as Mira travels to different places to scout for rumored wise man appearances, she sees more aberrant monster behavior and is forced to, from time to time, get down to the trenches to help fight them off. Even though Danbulf, or now let's say Mira, is probably the strongest summoner user in the world, it isn't as though she goes around just one-shotting everything like kablam. And even if she did, well, she didn't just walk into this world as a nobody with all the power. Danbulf put in the work and earned his stripes. So even though Mira is an overpowered character, it's not unearned, which is very refreshing given all the MCs that get isekai'd and are gifted all the skills with no learning curve whatsoever. And now let's talk about how this ties into the anime adaptation. When the anime was first announced, there was a lot of buzz in the anime community over it. Fans were stoked for this longtime favorite to finally get an anime, but their enthusiasm was quickly squashed when we got that first episode. I remember watching episode 1 and immediately being turned off by the abysmal computer-generated characters. I get that animating a horde of monsters can be costly and time-consuming, and in the current anime industry, that's practically a cardinal sin. But so is the trash animation. It was so terrible, and the first episode so boring and confusing that I actually dropped it and didn't pick it back up until earlier this year when I was craving some isekai and decided to give it another chance. While I think the decision to go with CGI monsters was definitely a cost-effective decision on the part of the animators, it did at least look like some kind of game monster model, so it kind of worked in its favor, reluctantly. Once I was able to muscle past the first episode, things picked up and I finished the anime with a lot of head scratching. It was okay, but it didn't seem to hit a lot of notes. I was left definitely wanting more, and I felt like something about the anime just was sort of missing. This is where the light novels really saved me. There was a lot of context to the series that just didn't get put into the anime properly, and So much of the first few volumes were just rushed through. The first episode was, well, it was weird. It was rushed, and yet it also had this slow montage of Mira exploring the world after getting trapped in it. And it just goes on for an uncomfortable amount of time. Whereas in the light novel, we, the reader, are given a glimpse into the thought processes about it all. Hell, entire events are presented out of order in the first few episodes to speed things up. And vital world building information is just casually dropped in the course of character dialogue. It felt like such a contrast that while I was reading the light novels, I actually went back and rewatched the anime a second time while reading this for comparison, which I've never done. And I noticed right away that much of the oomph that was in the novels was just absolutely gone from the anime entirely. It was an anime in name only, but it lacked almost all of the heart of the series. I'm not suggesting that the light novels are perfect either. They do come with some of their own flaws, most of which are gag related, or maybe it's safer to say demographic related. Jokes are taken way too far for the sake of getting a laugh, and side characters seem to relish in teasing Mira about being this small girl more than they should. Every time Mira comes into Solomon's court, she gets teased about something related to her new clothes, and then the maids appear, drag her away to strip her down and force her into some frilly outfit against her will. This gag is so overdone that at one point, I just wished Mira would explode the whole palace. I get that friends tease each other, but at a certain point, it went into pure disrespect and harassment, which I was not okay with. And of course, the anime, being the anime, took it even effing further. There is one scene where Solomon, for his own brain-dead enjoyment, keeps tapping a bell during a meeting. What I think is a serious meeting, if I remember correctly. And the whole thing gets interrupted. Maids appear, drag her off to dress her up. After the third or fourth time, I was genuinely pissed off. It stopped being funny and became pure, unmitigated cringe. Where the light novel shines, though, is in the world building and the setup of what's going on. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface here. We've gotten introduced to a lot of interesting characters and a lot of interesting places, but where the light novels fall a bit flat is, of course, in the overuse of the world building. It's its greatest strength, and I think it's also one of its greatest weaknesses. There are times when it feels like Pupil of the Wise Man is a slow burn, and moments when it gets into the trenches and we get swept along for the ride. And at least for the first two volumes, it's pretty noticeable. The balance is kind of jarring when it makes these transitions, but after that, things start to level off and it begins to take more shape. When it's a slow burn, it's excruciatingly obvious. When it's action-packed, it's also very obvious. And it's like I said, these transitions can be a bit jarring at first. It's understandable why the anime would speed things up the way it did, but as a consequence, it made the anime a much more hollow vessel for an otherwise rich story. I think the most problematic aspect being the fact that the anime is such a short, one core season. So almost nothing happens, and there's little in the way of conflict resolution, whereas the light novels at least had time to set up the long game and give readers more of a payoff, sort of. Now, as for the translation of the light novels, I don't think it's terrible. I think Seven Seas did an okay job, but there were some stylistic choices that did grind my gears. Mira has this verbal tick where they occasionally begin their dialogue with ho-ho, which never fails to remind me of a certain fat man that's dressed in a red suit at Christmas. It's jarring and obnoxious every single time I read it, and I want to punch something with my brain. Where I think most readers will be turned off by Pupil of the Wise Man, probably both in the anime and in the light novel, is the fact that Mira is a small young girl in body who either changes clothes, discusses undergarments, or goes to the bathroom more often than may be necessary. While none of this is written for the express intention of being sexual and more to play up the disparity of a grown man having to adjust to life in the body of the opposite sex, it's bound to be a deal breaker for some. And the anime doesn't shy away from this either. making every attempt to take the gag a step too far, as they do. All in all, I think the light novel series is a great isekai, at least for what I've read so far, and it seems to be getting better with each volume. The anime, however, is a certifiable empty shell, and I can only say that if you've seen it, do yourself a favor and go to the source. If you haven't seen it, then I could only advise you to just steer clear and save yourself a little bit of time better spent on other anime. She Professed Herself, Pupil of the Wise Man is a fun light novel read, and I easily recommend it to any fan of the isekai style, genre, whatever you want to call it. Any fan of isekai fantasy. There we go. I rate it an easy 3.5 out of 5, but only because I'm early in the series, and I may come back to this and increase that score later on once I have more volumes finished. So now let's turn those questions over to you guys. Have you read the light novels from Pupil of the Wise Man? And if you did, what are your thoughts on it? Also, how did you first discover the series? Was it the anime or was it the light novel? And how do you like the anime adaptation? I'd love to get your take on all of this, so be sure to head down to the comment section below and let's get some conversation going. That's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it and you'd like to see more videos like this, then be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget you can help out directly by joining the Patreon and buying me a coffee. It helps keep me awake during those long script writing sessions. Have an amazing day, everyone. Keep being awesome, and I will see you all in the next video.